Hello and welcome. And apologies for that. I was trying to do something clever and couldn't quite pull it off. Hello and welcome to Old Romans Unscripted. It's good to be back, having been away for a little while. Greetings there to Anne in Ireland, faithful Anne, and to Peggy too in Zakynthos. Oh, hold on. No, Barbara in Zakynthos. Welcome, Barbara. Peggy in Tennessee. And to Father there in Ohio. Greetings all. Father Philip in Macedonia. All the old regulars, good to see you, and it's good to be back. Now, this show is not going to be as long, probably. Well, that's what we've said to each other. As long as it might otherwise normally be. The way things are post-COVID, everything's just gone crazy. And to be honest, I've not known quite which day of the week it is this week. So today and the prospect of today's show came as a bit of a surprise. But nonetheless, we're here, and we want what I was going to do, if I can now find the quote, is to discuss some recent words by a certain Bishop of Rome. And I had them, but can I now find them? I was reading them not so long ago. Oh, come on now. Bear with me. Where have they gone? Ah, here we go. Here we go. Okay. So, yeah. So for our discussion today, we're going to refer to these words from Pope Francis, who said recently the following on, as usual, from a plane. So he says, I think this is very clear. A church that does not develop an ecclesial sense, its thinking is a church that goes backwards, and this is the problem of today, of so many who call themselves traditional. No, they are not traditional. They are backward-looking. They are going backwards, without roots. It has always been done that way. In the last century, it was done that way. And looking backward is a sin because it does not go forward with the church. Instead, tradition, said someone, I think I said it in one of the speeches, tradition is the living faith of the dead. Instead, these, who are looking backward, who call themselves traditionalists, it is the dead faith of the living. Tradition is precisely the root, the inspiration to go forward in the church, and always this is vertical. And looking backward is going backward. It is always closed. It is important to understand well the role of tradition, which is always open, like the roots of the tree, and the tree grows. A musician had a very beautiful phrase. Gustav Mahler said that tradition in this sense is the guarantee of the future. It is not a museum piece. If you conceive of tradition as closed, that is not the Christian tradition. Always it is the root juice that takes you forward, forward, forward. So for that, for what you say, thinking and carrying faith and morality forward, but while it goes in the direction of the root of the juice, it's fine. With these three rules of Vincent of Lerins that I mentioned. Well, aside from the fact that a lot of that doesn't make any sense whatsoever, it also, of course, betrays a misconception, which seems deliberate, of what tradition is in the church, and what tradition does for the church. In other words, and as you all know, as regular viewers, you know where we stand. We Vatican II, read the new liturgy, and what there's been since Vatican II is something of a deliberate ambiguity and a deliberate skewing of, well, it's a general sort of progressive trait to redefine words and terms and phrases, to redefine their meaning. So we've seen this, for example, in the secular sphere with the change to marriage. What constitutes marriage? Rather ironically, in this country, and certainly down the road here, there used to be in the registry office framed the words marriage is between one man and one woman. Now, of course, marriage has been redefined to include any couple, any two persons who commit to each other legally before the state. We now no longer know what the definition of a woman is. Well, we know, but that is to say that, again, woman is being redefined, or actually not even defined at all. But sex and gender is being redefined. And likewise, Francis, in many ways, one of the appreciable things about Francis, well, I say that with reservation, but is generally his truthfulness or his fidelity to what is euphemistically referred to as the spirit of Vatican II, by which I mean that he likewise tries to uses this same tactic of redefining things to misconstrue fundamental principles and truths in doctrine, dogma of the church. So, for example, with this situationary tradition, we've seen in his writings of late, like Traditionis Custodes, his representation of what tradition is. And here he's making the same and similar claim, that tradition is whatever the contemporary hierarchy say that it is, as opposed to, and this is deliberately to emphasize obedience to the contemporary hierarchy. And here he is saying that tradition is whatever they say that it is, and that it doesn't matter what the perennial magisterium of the church taught. It only matters what the contemporary magisterium defines. And this is, being played out with the synod and synodality, where we already know from the various discussions around the world, from the various dioceses, the reports that have come in, that the agenda that is being put together is inevitable, and that will result with so-called, well, not with so-called, but with actual novelties that will be introduced. But again, they will be, the presentation of those will be skewed as being some kind of doctrinal development from the sensus fidelium in union with the contemporary magisterium. And this is a great problem because, of course, for us as traditional Catholics, we adhere to and hold annual magisterium, and we understand that a contemporary magisterium is only valid in as much as it reflects and continues and interprets in light of the tradition which it has received. Bishop Kelly, did that make sense to you?
Well, you made sense. The gobbledygook of the playing didn't quite make sense. No, I'll grant it maybe the victim of bad translation, but I'm not so sure. See, what he fails to realize, he said, well, tradition is static, it's stuck. No, it's not. It has always moved, but the core elements have been there. For example, in early medieval times, there was no elevation of the Eucharist. That came along later so that people could see, and then you have the cult of the Eucharist, which the beautiful texts of Corpus Christi written by Thomas Aquinas come into being. The tabernacle wasn't always fixed to the altar. In fact, it was held above in a pyx, often in the shape of a dove. That's where the reserved sacrament was. You need to look at the history of the vestments of the Mass, from conical chasubles to skimpy little fiddlebacks. I mean, things have moved. It has embraced the ages, but the core elements have always remained the same, both of faith and of liturgy. And there's been no rupture. What Francis fails to realize, or at least glosses over to make his point, is the fact that Vatican II, there was a major rupture. The core elements were done, some of them were done away with. The introduction of ecumenism, that this isn't the one true church, and no one shall come to the Father except through me. Well, no, now you can go to the Father through Buddha and Krishna and all sorts of other things. The Mass itself was gutted, both in word and in spirit. The priest celebrating Mass for the people is now presiding, because it is the congregation that confects the Eucharist. Such nonsense and innovations like this. So to say that the contemporary church is the natural progression, is the only expression, etc., it's not, because something fundamentally went wrong. There's a huge flaw. There's a massive stake in the cogs, which has stopped it moving, actually. And all it does is spin round and round in this little Vatican II, spirit of Vatican II sphere, atmosphere, because it doesn't progress. I mean, you walk into any modern Roman church and liturgy, you might as well put your flares and your winged collars on, because you're right back in the early 70s. It's ridiculous. Nothing has changed. The music is rotten. Most of it was written in the 70s and 80s. Where's your contemporariness there? Where's your moving? Not. They want to sit in that quagmire of the spirit of Vatican II. Whereas you look at the traditional church that coming up towards Vatican II, the church in the 20th century, leaving aside, reform of the breviary and of that sort of stuff, but you look at how it progressed. You had Le Corbusier making these modernist churches, but designed for the old liturgy. You look at the monastery of La Tourette, which was for the Dominican order. Concrete, I mean, not my taste at all, but it was designed. But he studied, and he said, we need a refectory, we need a library, we need cells, we need a cloister garth, we need the chapel, we need a corino. And all of those were provided. They wouldn't be provided now. I mean, you could sit in a 2-bedroom bedsit and have a religious community. But then you look at the music of Messiaen, very dissonant, modernist classical music, but it was written for the old liturgy. And it's much better music than, I am the bread of life and stuff like that. I mean, it really is. So to say that the tradition has been static, no, we don't say masses in people's houses anymore. Well, I think we're being forced to now. But the style of architecture has changed, the style of music has changed, the style of customs have evolved, etc. But the faith has remained the same. The liturgy, the core elements of the liturgy has remained the same. You can't say anything like that after 1965, or you're hard put. I mean, you need to be an archaeologist to try and find some of the stuff in there.
Yeah, I mean this. I think what I find slightly refreshing, though it is of course hugely disturbing with Francis, is this transparency of this, as somebody says in the comments, this miasma of Vatican II. Refreshing because he's not trying to hide, as perhaps arguably JP2 and Benedict XVI did, the rupture that occurred in the 60s. Francis indeed has referred to himself as being a rupture. Let me just close this window. And his and Cardinal-elect Roche's views on the Mass, and saying that the new Mass is the only Mass, etc. They are now making clear what we as traditional Catholics have always been saying, that there is a difference between the two Masses, that there is, and that difference is doctrinal, if not dogmatic. It's the whole concept of what the Catholic faith is different. Now, for years, of course, faithful priests and others have tried with the Novus Ordo Missae to suggest that it's the same faith but presented differently in the new Mass. But as is becoming more and more clear and evident, the old maxim, lex orandi, lex credendi, lex vivendi, is proving itself true with the new rite and the new liturgy. That is to say, the law of prayer, the law of belief, and the law of living is affected by the way we worship. And in the contemporary church, with the new Mass, the evidence is apparent that there is a different theology. There is a different theology concerning the nature of the Mass itself. There's a difference in theology. There's certainly a difference in ecclesiology. There's a difference in the understanding of doctrinal development. There's no way that Cardinal Newman would be able to apply his theory to the changes proposed by the German Synod and the synodal way, and the synod and synodality as valid developments from tradition, and clearly with the new Mass, as more and more liturgical scholars critique the new Mass in comparison to the old. So it becomes more and more apparent to more and more people that the difference is not just simply aesthetic, it's not just simply in form, but it is in doctrine as well. And that's why, we've a generation now of Catholics, the vast majority of whom do not believe in basic fundamental Catholic doctrines like transubstantiation, like the sanctity of human life, like the prime purpose of marriage, and why so many have fallen away from the faith, and so many are prepared to compromise their faith with contemporary values, of the prevailing zeitgeist. And we see the effects in the church, don't we? I mean, we know there are, we see the drop in the size of Catholic families. We see the divorce and remarriage rates going up amongst Catholics. We see the falling away from mass attendance, and certainly from the sacrament of penance. There's no way that anyone surely can reasonably suggest that Vatican II and its fruit are in any way desirable and beneficial for the spiritual life of a Catholic Christian. And the question, now, I suppose, is, and to prove Francis wrong, his suggestion that, the traditional faith is a dead faith, the question is, so what do we do about it? What do we do about it? And the reality is that in order to, there are, I think, two aspects in the answer to that question. They are continuance and preservation. So how will the traditional Catholic faith persist? How will it survive? How will it continue and perpetuate? And the other question is concerning the reality of the situation today. Is it possible for Catholic tradition to subsist within what is today understood to be the Catholic Church?
Yeah, I think time will have to bear that one out. I don't know. I don't know the answer. Certainly at the minute, it's being persecuted. I think we've talked about this before, but it is extraordinary that the man who started his pontificate telling pastors to smell of the sheep of the flock is so unpastoral towards people attached to the traditional liturgy and towards Catholics in China, and so many other instances about it. He tells us now not to eat too much meat. More concerned about our diets than spiritual nourishment. It's heavily rumored that he's going to overturn Humana Vitae. Let's look at the churches that did that in the 1910s and 1920s. Look at the result. What does it lead to? It's just been a disaster, and so unpastoral. Now, many Catholics, modern Catholics, contracept. Does it make it right? No. But the church, are they going to stop doing it? I hope so. I hope one day they'll listen. But unless it's on the books, unless it's there as a paradigm model, they're never ever going to stop. If you say it's okay, then it's free reign. and to have it on the board, which is truth. I mean, we must be open to life that God gives us. And to take that off the books would be disastrous. There was a writer, turn of the 19th into the 20th century, when it was being discussed by various Protestant denominations, that warned that introduction of contraception would lead to abortion, and he was laughed at. But he was ultimately right. Is the Catholic Church going to go down the same path?
I mean, this is the thing. Is that all this. I mean, Francis has suggested that. I mean, basically, he suggested the other day, for example, that without synodality, there isn't a true church, and that therefore, for 1500 years, the Catholic Church wasn't the true church until now, post Vatican II, with his understanding of what synodality is. And he deliberately referred, rather ironically, to the Orthodox, who said that they alone have preserved this important attribute of the true church, meaning synodality.
Okay. Now, the Catholic Church isn't the true church, but the Orthodox is.
Well, that's more or less what he seems to imply.
We should all go goodbye, and take our pennies with us.
I mean, this is the craziness. I mean, the old joke is the Pope a Catholic. It's not a joke anymore.
It's not a joke, no.
It's not a joke anymore. But following hard on the heels of that is the question: is the Catholic Church the Catholic Church? Is the institution of the Catholic Church today, is that the visible expression and manifestation of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church? Mm-hmm. This is the serious. I mean, this really is the serious, the severity of the situation. If, as we can pretty much predict, the synod on synodality adopts the various attitudes being proposed by Germany and elsewhere, then this question becomes really pertinent. Because if we have an institutional church that no longer, for example, promotes and defends the sanctity of human life, that no longer promotes and defends the God-revealed understanding of marriage, and promotes an acceptance of diverse worldly values and ideologies with regard to the nature even of humanity itself, surely the question will have to be asked: is that the Catholic Church? And this is a shocking question, I know, and because so many will, jump to quote Pius XII and others, who in times past, would pronounce anathema on those who would suggest that there is a difference between the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, and that made manifest and expressed in the institutional church called the Catholic Church. But we're actually coming to a situation where that question arises. Does the Catholic Church consist of the baptized and the confirmed who hold to the perennial Catholic faith and live it, with or without the institutional body.
Yeah, I think Francis said himself that he may be the one who causes schism. But again, who are the schismatics? Are they the modernists or are they the traditionalists? I think we're almost at boiling point. So somebody turned on the stove, the cooker, or we're going to reach it. And just like Christians of yore, we have decisions to make. Do we hold fast to the revealed truth, or do we offer gifts to the emperor?
I mean, if the Anglican Lambeth conference finished earlier this week, that was going on for 2 weeks, where they actually what I would say to most people is, if you want to know where the Catholic Church is going under Francis, look at the Anglican Communion. And they've reached a stage where, they reached a stage a little while ago, where all that mattered to them was essentially the institution rather than the faith. And those who would hold to the faith were forced to leave, who in good conscience could not stay. Some of them became Catholics. Some of them continued with a conservative form of Anglicanism, but were decried by Canterbury and the Lambeth Communion as being breakaway and schismatic, etc. Now, not all of the Anglican Communion holds with the progressive theologies and practices of the Anglicans in the Western Hemisphere. So, 75% of the Anglican Communion is still doctrinally reformed, and holds that Scripture is divinely revealed. And they, at this Lambeth conference, the bishops there could not, in conscience, receive Holy Communion in Canterbury Cathedral at the conference Eucharists. And despite the PR of Archbishop Welby saying that we're walking together, the Global South bishops released their own statement to say, no, we're walking apart. We're walking apart. And that the rumor is that in 10 years' time, the Lambeth Conference traditionally meets every 10 years, that in 10 years' time, there won't be a Lambeth Conference. That in all likelihood, this was probably the last. And that if there is another meeting, it will be called an Anglican Congress. But the question, manifesting itself again for them now, as it is looming large for Catholics, is what constitutes the church? Is it the visible, physical institution, or is it those who hold and adhere to the divinely revealed faith? Which is it? Now, see, in Anglicanism, there's a clear divide. The institution, that is to say, Canterbury, Lambeth, the Church of England, etc., is clearly apostate. It's clearly apostate. Now, there's a remnant of conservative evangelicals and Anglo-Catholics staying, trying to persist in a faithful witness to tradition, but they are facing a continual upward hill, because for all the words of walking together and mutual enrichment, etc., it's obvious and clear that when it comes to promotions, only those who adhere to the progressive theologies and ideologies are promoted. Good old-fashioned conservative Anglo-Catholic bishops, clergy, are not made bishops. Conservative evangelical Protestant clergy are not made bishops. But those who can identify as A, B, C, D, E, F, G are promoted. And those who, reflect a spectrum and wide variance and diversity in theological approaches and stances are promoted. Whereas those who hold to that which has always been believed are not. And we're now facing a similar situation in the Catholic Church, where traditional, where bishops are not being promoted from amongst the ranks of traditionalist clergy, where those who espouse progressivist theologies and ideologies are promoted, whereas those who adhere to the perennial tradition and the magisterium of the church are not, and in fact even are persecuted. And this persecution, of course, comes from Francis with phrasing, with the suggestion like this, that traditionalists have a dead faith. And, we know that women's ordination and the dropping of women's ordination, contraception, etc., all these things are on the agenda for synod or synodality. And it'll be a miracle. It would take a miracle for them not to be passed by bishops who now are more afraid of what the world thinks than what Jesus has said or taught, or his apostles.
Yeah, no, it's I agree. It's pretty grim.
It's the Catholic Church is becoming Anglican. Not only that, it's becoming Protestant.
Well, it has since. I think Archbishop Lefebvre said that at the Vatican Council. Look at the liturgy. I forget who said it, but it was they wanted something that was pleasing and acceptable to Protestant brethren, and they even had them consult on the liturgy. Instead of going, any sort of outreach would be naturally towards the east. They didn't at Vatican II. They went towards the so-called Reformed West, which had really very little in common with it, but a lot more in common with the East, as if the East would have them. Perhaps they were right to be cautious all along. And they weren't always cautious, but it's really is quite sad, to see basically the bridal gown of Christ disintegrate before your eyes.
But there is clear, isn't there? There is something clearly fundamentally wrong with Vatican II.
Mm-hmm.
For this to have happened, there is clearly something fundamentally wrong with this spirit of Vatican II that has allowed so-called Catholic theologians and bishops, etc., to wander and stray so far away from the faith and from the received understanding of the faith and of tradition. And somebody in the comments here says within the question of the relationship of the established Church of Rome to the true Church of Christ is the question of the relationship of the contemporary papacy to the authentic Petrine office. And it has to be said that this situation, this part of the crisis today, is precipitated by Vatican I.
Mm-hmm.
And as again, I know I keep saying it every program, but the reservations that Cardinal Newman had about the proclamation of papal infallibility has led to this papolatry that we see today, which has enabled and facilitated Francis to do the things, to do and say what he has said and done.
Yeah, I mean, the objection, I mean, people talk to Vatican I, they talk about, the Austrian, German, Swiss bishops being the voice of opposition. They were basically the voice of Protestantism, but true loyal opposition came from the islands. It came from Cardinal Newman. It came from the Irish bishops who objected vehemently against the proclamation of papal infallibility. Everyone thinks of the Irish hierarchy and being very Roman and kowtowing to Rome. No, absolutely not.
Yeah, and there were Italian and American and French bishops likewise who all had and voiced reservations. And it's interesting that Francis seems to have the same attitude as Blessed Pius IX had, which is to say, as Pope, tradition, I am tradition. That whatever I say goes, and that despite the very constrained limitations that Pastor Eternus defines for the exercise of papal infallibility, and otherwise that the Church has experienced of the Petrine office. The Pastor Eternus clearly says it is not for the Pope to determine by himself what is the faith. That it's his role to guard the faith as a sacred deposit, and to pass it on whole and intact, with no diminution. And I think this is what this is large part of the problem today is. I think the fact that so many Catholics think that Catholicism equals the papacy, or papacy equals Catholicism, without understanding that actually what comes first is the Catholic faith. The Church, in fact, comes first. And that the role of Peter and the bishops is to preserve and to maintain, to guard and defend. The cardinals even to lay down their lives to maintain whole and entire that which has always been everywhere believed by all. I mean, it's rather ironic that Francis should be quoting Vincent of Lerins. But this is what they do. This is what the modernists do. They twist the meaning and understanding of things to suit their own agenda. But we are clearly, facing a situation. I really do believe we are facing a situation where, incredibly, the institutional church, well, the question has to be asked: is it synonymous with the Catholic Church? And I think here, one of the things that we as Old Romans and Marcel Lefebvre and way before any of us, St. Athanasius of Alexandria, the point is, it's possible to be faithful without succumbing to that which is clearly contrary to the revealed faith and discipline of the Church. One can make a principled stand that is consistent with Catholic tradition. In other words, to refuse blind obedience, as Lefebvre did, as the Old Romans eventually had to, as St. Athanasius did. This is consistent with the faith and with the Church's tradition. And I think the immediate reality, or the inevitable reality in the short term for traditional Catholics is going to have to be to temporarily step aside from the institution in order to be a faithful remnant, in order to preserve whole, entire, and intact the Catholic faith for future generations. And there are those who always will say, "Oh, well, that questions the doctrine of the indefectibility of the Church, etc." To which I would say, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't, because that which is bad and evil and inauthentic cannot be, nor claim to be, that which is true. So in other words, despite appearances, the truth eventually will out. But in order for the truth to will out, those who will be faithful are going to have to make sacrifices, and they're going to have to sacrifice to keep the truth. And the key, is again what we've always said as Old Romans, and what Lefebvre said. Nobody can accuse us of schism who otherwise are prepared to submit to a true and authentic papacy. St. Thomas Cajetan, whose feast day was earlier, I think this week, made the point that they cannot be called schismatic who would otherwise submit to the authority if they believe the authority was true and right. And even the new Code of Canon Law permits that one who holds deep-seated reservations, one who in conscience cannot accept something, cannot be held contemptible. This was kind of the irony and the travesty of Marcel Lefebvre's excommunication. because actually he clearly believed in his conscience that what he was doing was right and was necessary. But the same is, the same is true of all who adhere to the society and all who are Old Romans. If the right Pope came along tomorrow, things would be different.
Yeah, no, it's true. The excommunication of Archbishop Lefebvre was canonically permissible, but it smacks to me of sort of a desperation again of trying to claim authority over. Where the Pope is trying to claim authority over your conscience or over his. Which again is not. I mean, that's the fruits of Vatican I. So, yeah, I mean, I think we have to be true Catholics, and falsely people believe that being true Catholics is to blindly follow the Pope. Being true Catholics is to blindly follow the faith as revealed through tradition and sacred scripture. That will not lead you astray. Popes will, and have. Well, in fact, I don't think we've ever seen anything quite like this, because the bad popes of the past left well enough alone and too busy with their mistresses and waging war. And
the bad popes of the past were simply immoral.
Yeah.
They weren't heretics. And that is the difference. This is the pernicious nature of the situation today. It's insidious, this reinterpretation of the Catholic faith.
But it's just a reflection of the modern era. I mean, they kowtow to the world. They want to be accepted by society, by modern governments, by CNN, by the BBC, and they're desperate to say the right thing, rather than stick to their guns and be controversial. You can't have a debate if everyone's forced to believe the same thing. That's totalitarianism, that everyone has to just follow the same little red book. The church should be countercultural. But I think what had happened in the history of the church, it had become so used to being, sort of the leader of culture, the leader of certainly Western Europe, that when Western Europe takes a massive shift, it still wants to do that, and it'll do and say anything to try and keep relevancy, instead of coming back against it and saying, no, here's the truth. This is what you must do. Return to your roots. Return to your tradition. Return to cultural Christian Europe. Whereas now the church is turning towards cultural atheist modern Europe. It's again like everything these days. It's topsy-turvy.
It's topsy-turvy, and what's the word? Hypocritical.
Yeah.
It's at the moment, for example, there's supposed to be this whole concern about carbon emissions and blah blah blah, and ordinary people, because of and post COVID, are restricted, their ability to travel, And yet all the world leaders, including the Pope, who bang on about ecology and environmentalism and so on and so forth, fly around making personal appearances, emitting, huge carbon emissions with their private jets and their, etc. Trudeau is a, for example, this week flew over 5,000 miles to make a public appearance for 6 hours at a pancake stampede.
He brought the maple syrup, I bet.
But likewise, Francis, plans all these trips and flying around. But it is sin for anybody else. Sin for anybody else to.
We should give up our meat so Trudeau can go to pancakes.
But so as I say, and I know we say it every week, but the question that any faithful Catholic must ask themselves is, how can I remain faithful, and what is the best way for me to do that? And I would argue that, and I'm sorry to say it, but because of the paucity of good catechesis for the last 50 years, I would say that the majority of lay faithful certainly are best served by attending traditional chapels and traditional mass centers. It would be lovely to suggest that, no, if you're a traditional faithful Catholic, stay in your parish, even though it's the Novus Ordo Missae, stay there, cross yourself, genuflect, make a point all the time. But it's a waste of time. It's a waste of time. That would be a waste of time and a waste of effort and a waste of sacrifice, a waste of resources. Much better to find, seek, and support traditional Catholic centers of good doctrine, good teaching, good praxis, good catechesis. And because that is, largely the fundamental problem today, is the paucity of catechesis across the church. And not just for the laity, but for the clergy. I mean, for the clergy, the standard of seminary formation in the past 50 years has not been good, and only gets worse as more and more of these modernist and progressive ideologies infiltrate the lived experience and mindsets of the hierarchy and of the seminary professors, and thus of the seminarians. It would be difficult to find a contemporary seminary professor today or vocations director who would emphasize the sacrificial nature of the priesthood and of the sacrificial office of the priesthood. Instead, many will go on about, all those kind of social worker attributes that have nothing to do with the priesthood. A priesthood is ordained to offer sacrifice. You take that away, and they've taken that away, read the new Mass, because the new Mass is not a sacrifice. It doesn't use the term. Everybody uses the term to offer the holy sacrifice of the Mass, blah blah blah. And indeed, traditionalist-minded clergy will say, I'm off to offer the holy sacrifice of the Mass, or they will talk about the holy sacrifice of the Mass. But when it comes to the liturgy itself and the formulas, there's no mention of sacrifice. Because the theology and the doctrine of the new Mass is fundamentally different from that of the old. And I know, there are people who say, well, the Novus Ordo Missae there's an Ars Celebrandi way of offering the Novus Ordo Missae in such a way that, if you didn't know, you'd think it was the old Mass, if the priest said it facing east, and so on and so forth. That actually doesn't make any difference, because the actual formula itself is bereft of clear Catholic teaching. And this is the problem. And we have a hierarchy today and a clergy today, most of whom the Novus Ordo Missae is all they know. They have no concept or appreciation or understanding of the traditional Mass and the traditional liturgy. So that even if they wanted to, even if they did learn the old Mass, you couldn't guarantee that they would be able to do so holding the right intentions.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I've said it before, but the whole concept of concelebration is really, I would say, biggest and clear indicator that the theology of the new Mass is different fundamentally from that of the old, because it's not possible to have several celebrants offering one single sacrifice in persona Christi. It's not possible. And it's based on false theology and false liturgical archaeology. And it robs the faithful. Those people who give stipends expecting Mass to be offered for their intentions are robbed every time the priest who accepts those stipends concelebrates with somebody else, unless he's the principal celebrant. But if he's simply a concelebrant, he's not offering the Mass. There's only one high priest who has passed into the heavens. There's only one high priest on the cross of Calvary. Thus, only one can act in persona Christi at the altar. So, my suggestion for anyone going forward would be, find yourself a traditional chapel and support it, and be educated in the faith, and pray for the time that will surely come when full restoration will occur for the Church. But personally, I would, give up what I think would be an impractical and foolish and wholly imprudent idea of trying to be leaven within the contemporary Church, because it will just never be allowed to rise. The contemporary Church sadly has to fall apart itself before it can be restored. Any final thoughts from yourself, Bishop Kelly?
No, I quite agree. I think we've said it before on the show. I'm just thinking there. I think we have to try and this might be good for some of us, to dig in and remember our teenage university selves, where we were countercultural. There wasn't a rally wouldn't show up to. You'd stick a safety pin through your nose and paint your eyes black and the Goths and all that sort of stuff. It was all to make a point. It was all to just to be countercultural. Well, we need to do that again. We need to be countercultural. We need to be seen to be countercultural. And we do that, again, as we've said before many times, by our way of life, by the decisions we make. And that, as you rightly said, one of those decisions is just to come away from it. Not come out from it, but step away from it and its bad influences. You don't cease to be Catholic because you step away. You cease to be Catholic if you become a Lutheran or an Anglican or a Buddhist or a Hindu, but you're not. You're being authentically Catholic. So you're not coming out from it. You're just stepping aside, stepping back, as it were, from the bad influences of the contemporary church, because you're not being nourished in those places. Find a place that you can be genuinely nourished, that you can stand up for your faith. Read books, read your catechism, know your catechism, so you can argue in the marketplace the reasons for what you do and the decisions that you've made. And many of you out there will make it for yourselves, but you will make it for your family, to give them the best start in life. And let's face it, a very difficult world and society. Just don't follow blindly. What the contemporary world wants to feed you, whether it's through the church or through the media or through advertising or anything else. Stand away from it. You wouldn't catch a devout Muslim acquiescing to contemporary Western society, or an Orthodox Jew doing the same. No, they stand against it. They think it's rotten to the core. And they're right. They're absolutely right. So it's time we did that too, as Catholics. It's time we stood up and we said, this is rotten. The emperor has no clothes. This whole society needs to turn around. It is absolutely ridiculous as what's going on. The collective thought is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. And we need to return to logic and form a society again with the basic building block, which is the emphasis on the family, which is being constantly battled against and destroyed. We need to rebuild, because the consequences are dire. I mean, we're almost at the tipping point here, but when it tips and we go down, oh dear! I shudder to think, where it could end up. So stand up and be counted. Be willing to apologize in the right sense of that word for your faith, to explain it, to wear it on your sleeve. We're always told don't wear things on our sleeves. But yeah, wear your Catholicism on your sleeve. Let people should know you're Catholic. You don't have to do that by wearing a T-shirt saying I am a Catholic. But they should know. When you pass a church, cross yourself. When you sit down in a restaurant, say grace. People will look at you as if you've got 2 or 3 heads, but just do it. I mean, you have the right to do it. Sit on the bus of the train, take out your rosary beads and use that time, journey time, to say the rosary. People will look and they'll stare, but it's good. It's good they're looking and staring.
Yeah.
You might even get
Pause for the Angelus.
Pause for the Angelus. Stop in the middle of the street and say the Angelus. So there are many things that we can do. We don't have to put on yarmulkes and long Arab dress, but there are many things that we can do to be visible as Catholics. Reclaim the whole thing. Be countercultural. Be that feisty little university student you once were when you were trying to be unfailing and to be countercultural. But I think it's worthwhile.
Yeah, and remember, what St. James says: the only dead faith is that without works. So, as long as as long as traditional Catholics manifest their faith, and yes, in all those devotional ways, but also too in the exercise and manifestation of charity,
Utmost.
Then it's going to be very difficult for people to criticize us, even Francis. If we're known for our care and our concern and our generosity for the poor, not just in spirit but materially poor, if we're known for our care and concern and our generosity for the vulnerable, for the weak, for sinners even, and if we're known for striving to live a blameless life ourselves, then there's very little that anybody can throw at us. Our faith must be a living faith, and that's rather the irony of what Francis is saying, because the traditional praxis of the Catholic faith is all about manifesting faith, by crossing ourselves, by prayers at particular times, by various devotions, etc. It's impossible to claim to be a traditional Catholic and not be known for praying the Rosary, for observing the Angelus, for saying grace at meals, etc. Bowing in one's head and crossing oneself as a funeral cortege passes, crossing oneself when passing a church where the Blessed Sacrament is reserved, crossing oneself passing cemeteries, graveyards, etc. Okay, well, I think we'll bring things to a close. Keep to our mutually agreed promise. We're just over an hour, but
that was to be expected.
And we'll finish as we usually do with a blessing. But before we do, yes, visit theoldroman.com. Two particular permanent links now in the menu there. One, the excellent series on the sacraments, videos done by the SSPX, explaining the traditional teaching regarding the sacraments in contrast with the contemporary praxis. It's important that traditional Catholics know their stuff, understand what traditional Catholicism teaches and what it means. So that series is there in its entirety on a link in the menu. And likewise, too, also another series of videos on apologetics, things that Catholics should know how to answer, questions about, do we pray to Mary or do we worship Mary? What's the authenticity of the biblical authors? What's the evidence for the resurrections and so forth? Basic apologetics that Catholics should know. And remember, because being traditional Catholics doesn't absolve us from evangelism, doesn't absolve us from the Great Commission. That's perhaps one of the things that the naysayers would say of traditional Catholics. Well, they don't save souls. Don't fall for it and manifestly make that statement untrue. Know your faith, study your faith, learn the faith, and share the faith. And in manifesting it, you will draw others through you to our Lord Jesus Christ. Now let's pray a blessing.
Sit nomen Domini benedictum.
Ex hoc nunc udusque in saecula,
Auditorium nostrum in nomine Domini.
qui feci caelum et terram.
Benedicat vos omnipotens Deus, Pater et Filius et Spiritus Sanctus.
Amen. God bless you all. Thank you for watching. As always, do support us. We are a little desperate for funds at the moment, so please, if you're able to, spare a few shekels. If you could do that on a regular basis, then please consider becoming a Patreon patron. You can find us at patreon.com, Old Roman TV. Otherwise, in the show notes, you will find GoFundMe and PayPal donation options there too. Anything would be gratefully received, and all of it will enable us to continue to produce this content like this and more, which is the hope. I know we did say that the new series of Domestic Church will begin this month. It will begin this month. I know the expectation was last week, but I'm still twiddling with things. It will come out this month, focusing particularly on living the faith and apologetics. So look out for that new series when it comes. Otherwise, it's bless you for watching, and it's goodbye from me.
Goodbye from him.
God bless, and we will see you next week.
Bye now.